If you had asked me when I was in high school what I thought I would be doing with my life someday, I probably would not have answered that I would be unironically explaining how you can implement the I'm using tilt controls meme in a GameMaker game. But life works in funny ways sometimes, so let's talk about tilt controls in GameMaker. Hello all the crazy people out there, my name is Michael, I like wizards and dragons and making games. Today we are going to discuss motion and gyro controls in GameMaker. This is part of a long-running series that I'm doing on Juju Adams and Ellen Keith's input extension for GameMaker. So to do this, you're going to need a couple of things. Firstly, you're going to need the input extension for GameMaker, obviously. Since I've already made a whole series of videos on this, I'm not going to spend a ton of time explaining how to set this up, but you can go to this GitHub repository where it can be found. I will have links to everything down below. You can go to the Releases tab, and we can download input 7.0.1. .yyMPS. In the last video on input that I made, I didn't use input 7 because I hadn't had a chance to read over what the changes were between 6 and 7 at that point. The second thing that you'll need for this is going to be the GameMaker Steamworks extension. So GameMaker itself does not have a built-in way of returning gyro data from gamepads that you have plugged in on desktop. It can do some things on mobile, but we're not going to talk about mobile because I don't like mobile. And if you are using a Nintendo Switch or a PlayStation, the Switch and PlayStation SDKs do have built-in features for accessing that data, but console stuff tends to be rather NDA heavy, so I won't be going there. So you will need Steamworks for this, and therefore this will only work on desktop if you are making your game work on Steam, which I'm sure is going to bum some people out. There are some DS4Win funny shenanigan hacky things that you can do to get around this, but maybe that's for another time. Anyway, so you are going to need the GameMaker Steamworks extension, currently 1.7.0. We can go and download that onto my computer. In addition to the input extension, let's see. I probably should let's go and show in folder, and I can add these extensions to GameMaker. We can import the asset package. This is going to be Steamworks. Project Tool is going to do its thing. We're going to have to give that a minute. Let's add the Steamworks extension. I did make a video on Steamworks extension, generally speaking, a couple of weeks ago. So if you want to know a little bit more about things that you can do with that, I will have that video linked. If we add the input extension itself, we can once again wait for the project tool to do its thing. Let's add all. Apparently there are some included files left over because this is the second time I'm doing this, because the first time wasn't, well, it was kind of a mess. Let's see. I am going to need to configure some things in the Steamworks extension. So, firstly, the Steam SDK. So, on my computer, the location that I installed the Steam SDK to is c:/Steamworks/SDK. As discussed in the video that I made on Steamworks, you'll want to put in whatever the location that you have installed the Steam SDK to on your computer. The application ID. So for a lot of things, when you're testing the Steamworks extension in GameMaker, the default application ID of 480 is fine. That corresponds to a test game that Valve has called Space Wars, which you can use to test a lot of Steam extension stuff before you go and publish your game on the store and that kind of thing. But input uses a couple specific Steam input related features of app ID 480, which, as it happens, won't really work because Steam input has to be configured in the Steamworks settings for the game, and for Space Wars it is not. If you try to use app ID 480, it will yell at you. So we're going to have to find a backup plan. So if you already have a game on Steam ready to go, or at least a registered app on Steam ready to go, you can go to your Steamworks dashboard, which can be found here. You can scroll down to the name of whatever game/software/application you have, and you can copy the app ID, and you can use that. Sorry for all the blurriness that you're about to see, by the way, because Steam is generally pretty open about developer stuff, but the internals of the Steamworks dashboard also tends to be a little bit NDA heavy. I will discuss the important bits that you need to make Steam input work, though. Anyway, so if you scroll down in your Steam dashboard to the, where is it? Edit Steamworks settings right here under Technical Tools. If you click on that and go to Steam Input in the App Data Admin, you can configure Steam Input default configuration, and apparently I have not done that. I thought I did. I'm going to have to do that at some point. you're going to want to set Steam input default configuration to either gamepad with camera controls, gamepad with high precision camera aim, or I believe generic gamepad will also work. And you're going to need your game to have one of these 3 settings if you want Steam input to work with your game in GameMaker, with input anyway. Because I have apparently not configured that, at least not yet, and I don't want to spend time doing it now. You can also just kind of grab the app ID of another game on Steam that has Steam input configured for it. If you go to the documentation for input, there are some, where is it? There are some suggestions for app IDs that you can use. Where is it? Rebel Wings is one that is suggested. This is a silly little game on Steam, which has Steam input configured appropriately for it. It is a free game. You will need to add it to your account. You will need to click the play and install game and add it to your account if you want to actually be able to use the app ID for testing.
Hey.
But once you have done that, you can grab its app ID 378090. This is also the number that appears in the URL, in the Steam store page URL. And we can use 378090 as our test app ID for Steamworks in GameMaker so that we can access Steam input. It's a little bit more complicated setting this up than I'd really like, but such is the nature of the beast. Let's see, is there anything else I need to set up in order to do this? So, the controller that I will be using to test this with is going to be a little 8BitDo Lite 2 Bluetooth controller, which has built-in gyro features. Apparently it is connected, which is kind of nice. It appears in the Windows Bluetooth and devices list as just generic Pro controller. I believe you can also just use it with Switch Joy-Cons, but I'm lazy and I don't feel like going and finding mine, so we're just going to use the 8BitDo Lite 2. If you've never seen one of those before, it looks like this. It's not very big. Yes, I will be breaking out the IRL camera again for this. So there are really 2 different categories of things that you can use gyro and motion controls in your game for. One of them is obviously using it to control your game, for example, allowing the player to walk around in a first or third person game or that kind of thing. And the other is using it to drive the cursor. You can think of this as the pointer on the Wii remote in a lot of Wii games. If you want to allow the player to point their device at the screen and use that as an emulated mouse cursor, you can use gyro controls for that. And I'll be getting to both of those things in this video. I did make a video on the input cursor last week. There are so many intersecting subjects of discussion in here. Anyway, let me go into the step event where I am controlling the player in this game. So right now we're using some pretty bog standard first-person camera controls, or at least in modern GameMaker you can do this a little bit easier. You can use window mouse get DX and window mouse get DY instead of having to figure out the offset yourself. But anyway, this is third and first-person camera mouse look. I am going to comment those out, and I'm going to make use of a new function, input motion data get. This is a function which will return a struct containing several different motion-related values, which you can use with motion controls. Like most functions in input, it will optionally take a player index, so if you have multiple players hooked up to a game at once and you want to be able to tell them apart, you can pass in player index 0, player index 1, so on and so forth. By default, it's going to get motion data for player index 0. You know, when your wireless gamepad battery dies when you're in the middle of trying to demo this stuff, it's really awkward. Anyway, let me start this over from the beginning. So, input motion data get. This is going to return a struct of several values. I am going to firstly save those values into a variable called var gyro data. How about? Gyro data is a struct which is going to return 6 values which pertain to the motion in space of your gamepad. And to describe this properly, I'm going to have to talk about coordinate systems. So if we scroll back to the input documentation, there's a little diagram which you might or may not find useful. We're going to be, if you're familiar with airplane maneuvering, these terms might look familiar to you: pitch, roll, and yaw, as opposed to X, Y, and Z axes. So you can look at this diagram if you find it helpful. If not, I can hold up the gamepad in meatspace again, and we can look at how this would rotate in physical meatspace. So, rotation about the x-axis, that is going to be pitch. That is going to be tilting the gamepad up and down like this, or at least forward and backwards like this. this is rotation about the x-axis. Yaw, and that's a very funny word, I don't know what the etymology of it is, but yaw is going to be rotation about the y-axis, which is going to be turning side to side like this, as if you are just turning the camera left and right, okay? And roll is something that I don't really find useful all that often, but roll is going to be rotation this way. This is going to be side to side, like doing a barrel roll or something. And that is going to be rotation about the z-axis. And so the values which might be contained within gyro data are going to be angular velocity x, not that, whatever that is, angular velocity x, angular velocity y, and angular velocity z. We're also going to have acceleration x, acceleration y, and acceleration z. And these 6 values are going to relate to the gamepad's motion in space. These are all going to be in terms of radians, by the way, so angular velocity x is going to be in radians per second, acceleration x is going to be radians per second squared. So if I wanted to make use of these, firstly, let's comment those out so that this actually, like, can compile. You're going to want to check if gyro data is not equal to undefined. This function can return undefined if, for example, you don't have a controller plugged in, or if you don't have a controller recognized, or in some other situations where gyro data might not be relevant. So you're going to want to check if this is undefined first. Next, it's just a matter of plugging in the angular velocities about the y and x axes in place of the mouse deltas here. So instead of saying direction minus equals the mouse delta x, we can say direction minus equals gyro data dot angular velocity y, and we can say pitch plus equals, instead of the mouse delta y, gyro data dot angular velocity x. I realize that these two x and y coordinates are reversed from what they would have been if you were using mouse deltas on the screen when you move the mouse around, but thinking about the coordinate system in like gamepad space, direction is going to be yaw, which is y-axis, and pitch is going to be pitch, which is x-axis. So these two are the ones you want to use. So now, if I have set everything up correctly, if I run the game, and I'm going to have to like click into the game with the gamepad to actually make this work. If I hold this up and if I look left or right and pitch up or down, you can see that we now have motion controls. All right. That's very exciting. So there's a few problems with this. One is that you're going to notice that the motion is very slow. As I mentioned, these velocities are going to be in radians per second, whereas in like direction and pitch terms up here with the mouse deltas, we're thinking in degrees. While there's 360 degrees in a circle, there's only 2 pi, which is about 6.28 radians in a circle. And you can imagine that some unit conversion might be desired. To do that, we can say deg, or rather rad to deg to convert these values into degrees. Rad to deg velocity on the y-axis and on the x-axis. This is probably going to be incredibly fast all of a sudden if I were to do this. Let's see. Let me click into the game. Yeah, that's way too fast. Using mouse look, I was dividing that mouse delta by 10, which I think would be appropriate here. And if we were to now run the game in degrees divided by 10, okay, that feels a lot better. All right. So the second problem you might notice is that if you were to spend a lot of time looking around using gyro controls, and especially if you were to like really wave the device around a lot, and my first version of this video, I sent it to Aline for review to see what she thought, and she was really making fun of me for how hard I was swinging this thing around in meatspace. But anyway, we have the gyro slowly drifting off center, and there's a couple of ways you can deal with that. You can add a reset button. By the way, I did replace the WASD movement keys with input checks for up, down, left, and right, just so that I don't have to like go back to the keyboard if I want to move around in this demo. So if you wanted to, you could add a check for like if I don't know, if the player hits a key on the gamepad or on the keyboard, to reset pitch and direction to wherever you want it to be. Something like if keyboard check VK tab. Am I using the tab for anything? I think I'm using the tab key for something else. Let's map that onto like VKF1 or something like that. We can set direction equals 0 and pitch equals 0. And this will give us a little reset button on the gyro just in case it happens to drift a little bit off center. Or also, for that matter, if you were to like initialize the game with the gamepad pointing somewhere else, you might want to allow the player to reset that somehow so that you can recalibrate yourself. The other solution to this, and I'm actually going to have to go into the input. There's a ton of scripts in there now. Input config verbs. Let's see. Is there a button mapped to like one of the shoulder buttons? Let's see. Let me make a new verb, and I'm gonna call this aim, and that can be input binding gamepad button. The gamepad button can be like GP shoulder. Let's go with the right shoulder button since it's I think that one will be easier to see from the camera. With mouse controls, that's kind of irrelevant. And we can say in our step event, we only want to do this. We only want to enable gyro controls if the input verb for aim is currently being held down, and that will allow us to. What did I do? Where did I miss the parentheses? Oh, that needs to be a comma instead of a semicolon. Anyway, this will allow us to only use the gyro if we are holding down the trigger button. So that'll be this one here. If I'm not holding down the right shoulder button, then nothing's gonna happen. I can do whatever I want to the controller, and it's not gonna gyro. If I do hold it down, we can look around. We can look up and down using the gyro. If my hands get tired, if I want to put the controller down or something, I can take my finger off. I can do whatever I want, and the gyro won't drift in all kinds of crazy directions. That's probably the better solution. It's probably not a terrible idea to have a reset button like this just in case if you're doing gyro controls, but something like this should allow us to prevent the gyro from drifting off on its own somewhere. Okay, so that's the fun use of motion controls in GameMaker. The second use of motion controls in GameMaker is a little bit less flashy, but it's probably the one that more people would actually use because this is something that can actually be used if you're not making like a first-person shooter. You can use the gyro control to drive the cursor, as I mentioned. Let me go to the draw GUI event. I'm going to draw a circle at the position of the input cursor. I can say var cx equals input cursor x, var cy equals input cursor y. And let me just draw a circle. Let me draw a red circle at position cx, cy. Radius, let's make it a big circle. Let's give it a radius of like 16. We'll make it c_red so that it's hard to ignore. Outline false. And we can use the input cursor as mouse emulation. So this is the input cursor is a handy thing. We are doing mouse lock. Let's not do mouse lock. Let me comment out the window mouse set. And again, if you're using a newer version of a GameMaker, you can actually just use native mouse lock without having to do this yourself. But let's see, where is the input cursor? It is like not here. All right, that was really weird. I don't know what happened there. I don't know if my controller disconnected from the Bluetooth temporarily. I don't know if like the Steam client started randomly stealing inputs from the game, because I have seen that happen once in a while. Right input cursor being driven around. If you have a controller in use, it will be driven by the right thumbstick like this. And there is a function that you can use if you want to allow the input cursor to be driven by gyro, and that is going to be somewhat predictably named input cursor gyro enabled set. And we can just set that to true. Again, this function will take an optional argument for the player index should you need that, in case you want to have different, if you have a multiplayer game and you need different gyro cursor behaviors on like different player indices. So I can still drive around the cursor using the right thumbstick, but now I can also drive around the cursor, the input cursor, using the gyro control. And that's kind of fun. This is something that probably has more legitimate uses than like looking around in a first person game, especially in GameMaker. We can speed up the input cursor a little bit by saying input cursor set. Is it input cursor speed? Input cursor speed set. I feel like I messed that up in the last video too. Let's set that to like 20. And that should cause the input cursor to be a little bit more sensitive and turn a little bit farther when we look around. All right, a little bit. I forget what the default is. I want to say the default's 12. If I hold this with two hands, it might be easier. Likewise, you might occasionally notice, especially if I swing this thing around wildly, that the cursor drifts a little bit off center of where the actual like gyro position should be. And in cases like this, it definitely would be a good idea to occasionally have a reset button. It definitely would not be a terrible idea to enable or disable input gyro cursor, depending on if you're holding down the aim button. Let's try that. I can say if input check aim, like this, we can input cursor gyro enabled set. If you're holding down the aim button, we'll set that to true. If you're not holding down the aim button, we'll set that to false. And this should allow us to only actually drive the red dot on the screen, the input cursor, when we're holding down the button. Otherwise, the cursor won't move. I can move it around with the thumbstick as usual. If I'm not holding down the button, then whatever I do with the actual device won't really matter. If I were to hold down the button, we can proceed as if recalibrated. All right. Doing this as one hand is kind of awkward because like if I go a certain distance, I'll start like twisting my wrist instead of rotating it. Enough of that. So that is some of the fun you can have with the input gyro. I don't really expect many people to actually make heavy use of this, but it is an interesting thing that you're allowed to do, and it could be a fun little way to provide alternate controls if you're into that kind of thing. If anyone does make like a racing game where you actually implement tilt controls, let me know and I'll play it on the channel or something like that. But anyway, I think that's enough for now. I like to post videos on the weird stuff you can do in GameMaker, especially weird 3D stuff like this, so if you're interested in this sort of thing, feel free to subscribe. I have a Patreon, so if you want to contribute to the channel, links to that can be found in all the usual places. You should all go check out Wizarducks and the Lost Hat, which is the game that I like to work on when I'm not doing YouTube stuff. Link to that can be found down below as well. I hope you all found this interesting, and I will see you all later. Special thanks to Zenjamin, VitroV, Squarecrow, Spy Die Games, Manta Ray, GameMaker, Edward Holt, and DJ Gibbles for supporting these videos. If you want to contribute to the channel, head on over to the Patreon page down in the video description to join the fun.